Hey everybody, hope you're doing well. I wanted to spend a few minutes today talking about Chapter 14 of Business and Professional Communication, which deals with the work-life balance. This is the last chapter that we're going to be covering in Careers in Communication, and a chapter that is mostly dealing with prioritizing and time management. And those are things that I'm sure you're already very experienced with. As a student, a lot of you will have three, four, five, maybe six classes this semester. A lot of you have work study or a second job. A lot of you are student athletes with daily practice and weight training and all sorts of games and travel. Other of you are maybe leaders in different campus organizations or ministries. And on top of all those responsibilities, you have a family life back home that you're probably connected to, and certainly have a social life, friends, and maybe a significant other, adding to what takes up a lot of your time and a lot of your priorities. And so, a lot of this, I hope, will be a refresher to you and a reminder to you as you learn to establish your boundaries, prioritize your time, and ultimately ask for help as you need it. This class is focused on thinking about your career, and I think it's easy in your career to strike an imbalance where you um, will face a lot of challenges as you move into a professional career, but it's easy to let work become your life. And I don't think that's ultimately anyone's goal. Work is important in this class, and in many ways has been about how work is important. But certainly there are a lot of other really important things, and I would argue much, much more important things than work. So this chapter, chapter 14, really is talking about some things that go along with finding that balance. And I just want to talk about a handful of tips that are in your book for sure, but also tips that I think have been successful for me and my own experience as a post-college full-time employee for about 16 years or so now. Things that have been helpful uh, for me to consider. And I think one of the easiest things to do if you are concerned about working too much or being consumed by your career or being what is sometimes called a workaholic is simply just to take a few minutes and reflect on the most important people in your life, your most important relationships, not worried about any material possessions, not worried about anything like that. You're probably thinking of um, your closest friends, maybe your parents or siblings, a girlfriend, a boyfriend, maybe a spouse. And if we think about your job getting in the way of those things in a significant way, that would be difficult. Because how would you feel if your work life completely dominated your personal life? I'm sure, as your book mentions, you've heard plenty of people complain about their job or say, all I do is work, or the emails never stop coming, or I'm never going to be able to make it to my kid's birthday. I always have to work. And those are very important considerations. And so I don't want to paint a negative picture of work life to kind of conclude my lectures in this class, but to encourage you as we talk about boundaries to think about stress and burnout and dealing with difficult clients and difficult coworkers, how that can hinder a lot of the goals that you have outside of work for your life. And so this is really all about surviving in the workplace. And one of those is to establish boundaries and to stick to them. That's one of my biggest pieces of advice to you. Your textbook defines boundary as the line or division between work and life. And obviously, the assumption is that if there's a boundary between work and life, then balance is the result. The problem is by saying, oh, I'm just going to set really clear boundaries, um, life can't always be neatly divided into two parts. Now, sometimes that's a positive thing. Maybe one of your coworkers becomes a very good friend. It is possible that some of you might even one day work the same place as a loved one or a spouse. But especially in this field, in the field of communication, where so many of you might be involved in journalism or advertising or marketing or social media management and these kind of creative content producing kind of employment situations, that it can be difficult in our industry to have a job where let's say, you clock out at 5 o'clock and you go home and you don't think about work until you show up the next day. A lot of times there are still emails or phone calls that are coming in that might need to be answered, and there might be something you need to think about when you get home from work to maybe prepare for a presentation of the next day or um, something like that. And I think as beautiful as technology is, and we've talked about this already, because we have smartphones and laptops and Wi-Fi at home, that it's really easy for your boss, your coworkers to have access to you 24 hours a day. But obviously, that's not a healthy choice. And I think setting boundaries is a very healthy choice. Thinking about how you spend your time on the average day, in the average week, and how did you choose to spend your time? We get 24 hours a day, and when those are over, we don't get them back. And so setting boundaries, setting priorities of not thinking about work, putting away your phone, concentrating on your friends, on your family, on your kids, on your spouse is a very healthy, but also a very important thing to do, because those things are probably much more important to you than your job. So make sure that your time matches up with that. But the goal is ultimately to find that work-life balance, to have a productive balance between work and your family life. And there are plenty of benefits for that along the way, not just for you and for your family, but also for your work itself. If you have a healthy work-life balance, if you set boundaries, if you prioritize the things that are truly important to you, your work is going to be more satisfying, more meaningful, and chances are when you are working, not just will you be more focused and productive, but you'll have more time and focus on the things that are most important to you outside of work. You have a successful work-life balance, you'll be less likely to bring problems from work home and vice versa. You'll have better health and mental health and self-esteem and all those things. And not just that, but you'll experience less burnout and be more likely to stick with the job that you're in if you are able to strike that balance. A lot of times, um, as your book mentions throughout a good chunk of the chapter, there are plenty of scenarios that might cause stress at your job, whether that is balance overload, maybe you have negative coworkers, angry clients, maybe there's some workplace bullying. There's unfortunately a lot of negative scenarios that can happen at work, and it can be hard to compartmentalize those or to deal with those, or to find balance. That's why it's important, even though you won't see that on my PowerPoint today, it's important to ask for help when you need to ask for help, because this is complicated. This wouldn't be a chapter in your book if it wasn't complicated. But we're going to be happier if we have a strong support system around us. And so sometimes that might be asking a coworker to help you pick up some slack. Sometimes that might be asking a friend or family member just to listen, and those sorts of things. But here are some other strategies for balance and achieving that balance that your book mentions. The first one of these is knowing yourself. Only you know what your priorities are. Where do you spend most of your time? And when you're not at work, when you're not in the office, when you're not clocked in, when you're not on the job, depending on, what your workplace scenario is, how do you spend your time? Your friends and family are probably crazy important to you, very, very important to you. But how much time do they get? What about your health? What about, are you going to spend time exercising? What about your hobbies? How much time do they take? Are they a priority to you? And everyone's priority is going to be different, not just if you're type A or type B personality, but ultimately deciding what's important to you. To some people, a spiritual life, Bible study, going to church, things are very important and are a huge building block for people's life. For other people, that might not be. For some people, spending a lot of time talking to and with your parents might be very important to you. For other people, maybe not. Some people may want to spread their free time out among a few dozen friends. A few people may want to instead spend that time devoted to just a couple really close friends. And so knowing yourself is a good starting place as well to figure out your strategy for balance. What is important to you? And going along with that, whether you're type A or type B, one of the most important things you can do is, when you know what's important to you, is having the ability to say no. So this is kind of a silly example, and certainly a University of Cumberland's only example of that. But I had an opportunity recently to be a regular judge in the Spotlight singing competition. Now, while on some level I should not be judging a singing competition, and if you've heard me sing, you would agree with that. But beyond that, as fun as that sounds, and as much as I enjoy Spotlight and listening to people sing, and being involved in student activities, and helping people out with CAB, Campus Activity Board, ultimately, I thought about how many hours a week that would take away from my family. And even though that seemed like a great opportunity, I said no. And I think sometimes it's easy to get kind of lost in things that aren't important. I wish we had had more time this semester to go over some of the readings from Jon Acuff's Do-Over, though I still would recommend that book to you. But one of the things he talks about in that book, which we could still classify as knowing yourself, is deciding what to fail at. And that might sound horrible, and you might say, I'm not going to fail at anything. The reality is, you might have to make something less of a priority. And you would be surprised how many people don't have time to maybe chase their goal, maybe as a freelance writer. People that want to publish a book. Say, I don't have time to write, but they found, 3 hours a day to watch Netflix, or 2 hours a night to play video games. And certainly if you want to watch TV or Netflix or play video games, that's okay. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not condemning those things. Those are great. But what's most important to you, and how are you spending the time that you have that's available? Wouldn't that time be better spent maybe with friends or family? I don't know. So ultimately, knowing yourself. I have several former students right now that are in law school, and they have talked to me a lot about how challenging it is because they said they know some of their classmates in law school spend at least 3 or 4 hours a night studying and reading. And for them, they have a literal cutoff point and say, you know what? I have other goals in life. I can't spend my entire evening every night reading and studying. I will spend some time, most every night, reading and studying. But ultimately, know yourself. Figure out what's important to you. The next one of these is to develop emotional intelligence. Now, emotional intelligence is a term you might remember back from the interpersonal communication class. But this is your ability to monitor your own feelings and emotions and to use this information to guide your thinking and actions. So by learning to manage your emotions when you're stressed, when you're dealing with deadlines or difficult people or a whole host of other triggers, you'll be able to address that issue in hand and then move on. It won't kind of bleed over into every area of your life. It's okay to experience frustration, to experience anger, to experience sadness, and all sorts of those things. But you want to avoid kind of being counterproductive with those emotions. You don't want to swallow or suppress everything. You don't want to project, let's say, anger at the wrong target. You don't want to use alcohol or something like that to kind of deaden the pain. And so you want to try to find, as a part of emotional intelligence, a way to deal with your emotions in a healthy basis. So being honest about what you're feeling, finding a way to talk it out with maybe a trusted friend, maybe a qualified counselor, and using things like relaxation or finding a hobby or self-care type of exercise that helps you release some tension. And ultimately, um, if it's a scenario that you feel like you need to speak up, express yourself with the person that you are dealing with, and trying not to dwell on kind of hurt feelings can go a long way in helping you achieve that balance in life. The third tip that your book mentions is improving your time management skills, which is certainly easier said than done. It's one of my biggest struggles, if I'm being honest. Um, but like I mentioned earlier when I was talking about Netflix or video games, um, a good starting point in time management is identifying external time wasters. These are things um, that you don't have any control over, that you've got to deal with. And then internal time wasters, more personal internal things brought on by bad habits or your mindset or motivation. Part of finding balance in time at work versus time at home um, is figuring out what time wasters, both internal and external, are truly worthwhile and which ones aren't. Maybe you love the way that Game of Thrones ended, for example, but I don't know how many people were shocked that I did not have or choose to find the time to watch Game of Thrones on a weekly basis for years. But ultimately, I have no regrets about that, and glad I spent my time doing other things, and glad I spent that time um, sometimes watching something that I enjoyed more, but sometimes so that I could uh, chase some hopes and dreams for my freelancing career. Sometimes it was so that I could spend more time with my friends and my family and not devote hours each week uh, to a show that ultimately doesn't matter in the whole scheme of things. And so thinking about um, what makes sense for you and identifying areas that you want to set aside time for. And this might seem like a silly fourth example as we bring this little lecture to a close, but your book mentions a lot of different statistics about taking a vacation. And while in 2020 and 2021, so many people are working from home and maybe travel is limited compared to how it used to be. But in these surveys that they cite at the end of chapter 14 in your textbook, they talk a lot about how, especially in the United States, according to Harris Interactive surveys, about 1/3 of adults here in America don't take all their vacation days in the average year. A lot of employees, regardless of the industry that they're in here in America, um, don't don't rest and don't rest well. A lot of people don't take a vacation, and I would encourage you, regardless of what stage in life you are in, if you are single, if you are married, if you have children, if you are close to retirement at any point in your career, to take time to rest. I think one of the most godly and biblical things that we can do is rest. And as I kind of bring this chapter to a close about finding balance, I think there's a great wisdom in Scripture encouraging us to take a Sabbath to find rest. I think there's great value in knowing that we can focus more, achieve more, and have a much more fulfilling and meaningful life if we take time simply to rest, to do nothing, and to take a vacation from work, because there's always more work. There's always more to be done. And so to find that balance, I think a lot of times comes with choosing to work hard, but balancing that with choosing to rest and spend time on the things that are most important to you. And that's probably not work, and it shouldn't be. And there, I'm sure, are plenty of other strategies that we could talk about and think about when it comes to achieving that balance between work and life. But always ask yourself, what's most important? And then do an inventory, an honest reflection. Are you spending your time in a way that matches up with what you say your priorities are? And if not, try to make that change. And you'll be one step closer to achieving the difficult work-life balance that you hope for. With all that being said, I want to thank you again, as always, for listening and for being a part of the class. If I can help you in any way as this bi-term comes to a close for careers in communication, please let me know how I can help you. I'm always in your corner, always cheering for you, and I wish you nothing but the best. I'll talk to you soon. Thanks for listening.